Welcome. So, this is The Virtue of Playfulness. This is me, Boomer Trujillo, narrating the book, The Virtue of Playfulness Why Happy People Are Playful. And we're just going to start reading through it. So, I'm going to start scrolling through the book. There's some endorsements. Shout out to all the people who endorsed it: Sean Klein, Emily Ryle, Nick Riggle, Michael Ridge, and Avery Kohlers. Really appreciate you. There's a one-page synopsis, which I think is really useful in case you just want to see if you're interested in the book at all. You can read that page and see if you're into it. And I also have a bunch of other stuff. The front matter I'm basically going to skip, except for this. The dedication, generally speaking, I say to my leisure time companions, the bloods and buds, the memers and dreamers and streamers. So basically to my friends and family and the people who send me memes and who I meme, the people who are out there thinking about weird ways, new ways to live, and the streamers, because I spend a lot of time online. Shout out to all my Twitch friends. So the acknowledgements, there's a lot of people that I try to thank. I apologize if I missed anyone. I was right at the word count. The word count for this book series is 50,000 words, which sounds like a lot, but it's not that much. So just thank you to anyone who has been in my life the last few years while I've been working on this. Okay, let's start with the book. Introduction. Playfulness. Seriously. Philosophy and the Athenian Playpen. Plato's Academy. The term conjures images of bearded men in flowing white tunics, pontificating as they stroll past marble buildings. Even though many universities perpetuate this image, it is inaccurate. Ancient Greece was vibrant and playful. For example, before he wrote his dialogues and founded the academy, Plato crushed opponents in the wrestling ring. His wrestling coach named him after his formidable statue, Platos, meaning broad in Greek. And this name stuck much better than Aristocles, his original name after his grandfather. Ancient Greece had philosophy and democracy, yes, but its now time-bleached statues were once painted bright colors. Processions of Dionysian revelers periodically marched through its streets while carrying penises and shouting vulgarities. Alongside the tragedies of Sophocles were the comedies of Aristophanes, who wrote about farts and sex. We hearken back to ancient Greece for its philosophy, high art, and conquests, but not much else. For whatever reason, we rarely tend to the lighter side of life in history and academic thought. I think that this is a mistake. It neglects a huge part of human life. This is especially a problem for philosophy because it takes itself as footnotes to Plato. But few allow Plato temperamental complexity and human crudity. Footnotes to Plato differ when they're attached to text written by an alabaster statue rather than a flesh and blood, battle-tested, joke-loving man in a cosmopolis. This book is not about Plato, though the points about Greek culture hold. Instead, this book summarizes and extends the ideas of Plato's most famous student, Aristotle. I chose Aristotle because his version of ethics is more complete than Plato's, and Aristotle's theory became relevant to contemporary ethics when a group of women philosophers, especially Philippa Foot, Rosalind Hursthouse, and Martha Nussbaum, revitalized his approach. They founded a neo-Aristotelian theory, and I subscribe to it. But I will not defend neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics as the best theory to hold. But I will show how it can handle subtle subjects like play and playfulness, the core ideas of this book. I also invite ethicists of other persuasions to add to my discussion. Philosophy does best when it plays well with others. After all, when refuting Plato, Aristotle said that he was a friend foremost to truth, and Marcus Aurelius openly asked for refutations because self-deceit and ignorance harm people more than truth. I agree with them. When playing philosophy, I would rather you co-create ideas with me than merely spectate. If you think that I'm wrong, first, I'm flattered that you're thinking of me, and second, I'm happy to listen why you think so. This book is about taking play seriously. More precisely, it is about the virtue of playfulness. Throughout, I distinguish between play, an action, from playfulness, a moral character trait. In thousands of years, few philosophers have written on playfulness as a character trait, which is why I hope to advance a theory of playfulness here. I'm concerned less about what constitutes an action of play, and more about what playful people do, on what occasions, and in what ways. This distinction matters because someone can do playful things, without being playful, being a person who uses her leisure time in the right ways, in the right circumstances, consistently well across time, or so I argue. This latter phenomenon is what I hope to classify. But when I say classify, I do not mean to offer a genus and use differentia, a strategy Aristotle deploys in his Metaphysics. Nor do I hope to give precise semantic boundaries for what terms refer to, at least not to the extent that Aristotle does in categories. Both are suitable ways of defining things that can be metaphysically and semantically exact. However, whatever lines the boundaries of playfulness have, they feather at the edges. I focus on playfulness's ethical dimensions, and unfortunately, this means that my definitions cannot be as precise as logic, geometry, or even biology. I heed Aristotle's advice on ethics. In ethical work, he cautions readers that the truth can be offered only roughly and in outline, and no wise person ever looks for more precision in a subject than it actually allows. There is irremovable imprecision when talking about good lives, good people, and the characteristics of both, such as play and playfulness. But these theoretical limits constrain only the precision possible in this conversation, not its importance. The stakes are no more or no less than living a good life. If what I'm saying has no relation to everyday action, my project failed. So how do I hope to offer a characterization of playfulness? I use examples and generalized descriptions of phenomena. Aristotle looks to good people who live good lives, and they become exemplars of ethical values as well as templates for deliberation. Aristotle often works from examples, and he conceptualizes virtue as an intermediate state of proper development between extremes of malformation of character. Virtues are frequently found in the intellectual Goldilocks zone. For example, courage is facing fear in just the right way, neither being too afraid as a coward, nor utterly inattentive to fear as a rash person. Virtue, Aristotle argues, is like aiming for the center of a target. You can look at the extremes to aim between them. There are, after all, many more ways of going wrong than right, and the wrong ways can guide us, through process of elimination, to the right ways. Rather, it makes him the imprecision does not deter Aristotle or me from talking about ethics. Rather, it makes him attend to the many ways people live worse and better lives, and he distinguishes the alternatives for forming our characters. This is why I use examples and general descriptions of play and playfulness throughout. I hope that these rough strategies for characterization are good enough to give action-guiding ethical advice, ways of evaluating the goodness of doing certain things and being certain ways. So, I cannot give precise definitions or exact semantic boundaries, but general descriptions and examples should work well enough for my purpose. Aristotle has a dialectical method in ethics, starting with the opinions of others to lay out the extant theories, and then scrutinizing the ideas to see which of the alternatives holds up best. I borrow this sometimes, but I will not hesitate to part with conventional understandings of playfulness. Aristotle may have liked common sense more than I do. In fact, my readers would be well served by avoiding strict associations of playfulness with general frivolity, whimsicality, mischievousness, or participating in games. My definition of playfulness will differ substantially from some colloquial uses. However, the payoff of my occasional departures from extant opinions is that my characterization will be able to explain the most important associations, and it will distinguish between genuine good types of play and false bad types. That is, while I begin with conventional ideas and take on the mess of human ethical life, I also want structure and discrimination where possible, even if that means forging a new path through the debate. I think Aristotle sometimes does something similar. For example, in Nicomachean Ethics, he separates the real virtuous courage from other courages, like the courage of people who overcome fear-inducing situations because they fear public shame, or like the courage that some soldiers exhibit because they fear what their officers will do to them if they disobey. These mimic courage, but Aristotle argues that they are not it. Analogously, there are many things that people call playful that I exclude from proper playfulness. My hypothesis and vocabulary. Long and short, I argue that playful people use their leisure time well, and all happy people are playful. I argue so in chapter 4, but it takes me 3 other chapters to set this up. The many puzzles about play are what lead me back to Aristotle. I hope that by tracing the concept back to Aristotle, I can find a useful starting point for our conversation. Chapter 1 reviews Aristotle's take on play, the action. Aristotle has a mixed opinion of play. In some ways, it is necessary for human life, as when it helps children to develop or adults to rest their bodies and minds after stress and labor. Yet Aristotle also argues that play is insufficient for a good life, and he derides it venomously when it encourages loose morals. Chapter 1 establishes the way that play gets evaluated ethically by Aristotle. It is central to my conception of playfulness because it associates play with leisure, and it shows leisure to be something that we must use well in order to live good lives. Chapter 2 then builds on Chapter 1's insight that play has ethical stakes. It summarizes the core concepts of Aristotelian ethical theory to evaluate play. Here, I summarize primarily the values of happiness, eudaimonia, and virtue, arete, and I show why leisure, schole, is so important for Aristotle. Many words are difficult to translate, so let me mark some curiosities here. I translate eudaimonia in various ways. Most commonly, I render it as happiness, because it is a common word today, and people still consider the pursuit of happiness worthwhile. But sometimes I choose flourishing, which emphasizes that eudaimonia takes time and commitment to achieve, and it is something that actualizes a potential in human life becoming the best it can. Flourishing separates Aristotle's actual use of eudaimonia from contemporary tendencies to view happiness as an acute emotional state. No doubt, flourishing entails positive emotions and moods, but it cannot be reduced to them. It is more an accomplishment of a person cultivating her whole self and living her entire life well. Happiness and flourishing will be synonymous for me, and I switch between them to emphasize different aspects of eudaimonia. Similarly, I render arete, plural aretai, in various ways. Most often, I render it as virtue, since the word captures the positivity of developing a good character. Sometimes I choose excellence because it emphasizes the activity of forming good character and that a human must perform tasks well and over time to develop aretai. Virtues take work to develop, and they almost always benefit their possessors' lives, or so Aristotle and I assume. Virtue and excellence are synonymous, but again, they emphasize different aspects. Relatedly, sometimes I discuss moral character traits, which technically apply to both aretai, virtues, and kakai, vices. There is a sprawling contemporary literature on virtues, vices, and their psychological characteristics, but unfortunately I do not have space to summarize it. Generally speaking, though, moral character traits are deeply ingrained ways of acting, thinking, and feeling, much like habits, but bigger and more complicated. They are moral because they impact our lives in moral ways. They do this by inclining us to flounder or flourish when facing unavoidable, universal situations in human life. For example, all humans face fear, from reacting to things that go bump in the night, to reacting to the things that go bump in our capitalist hellscape that threatens to disintegrate every aspect of who we are and how we love one another. Yet, if you do not learn to face fear well, it creates moral problems. By contrast, if you develop the trait of courage, you will face any fear-eliciting circumstance well, no matter the domain of life, no matter whether the fear is elicited by asking a romantic interest to dinner, negotiating a raise from your boss, or facing a terminal illness. All the ways that we face fear train us to become courageous or cowardly or some other predictable pattern of character. As you probably sense, this gets complicated. I avoid many complications by focusing on offering a way to organize observations about playfulness specifically. I am committed to the theory that playfulness is a global moral character trait. But even if it is something else, perhaps a local aesthetic trait, my analysis should be useful. Few people have addressed playfulness in any respect, so I hope that, if I am wrong, my errors provide a productive foil. A last note on my language: I use ethical and moral as synonymous, but I more strictly mean ethical. In ancient Greek, ethos refers to customs, character, and habits. it deals with wide scope aspects of character traits and flourishing and how people judge and interact with each other. I mean ethical because part of being a neo-Aristotelian virtue ethicist, which I've already confessed to, is refusing any evaluation of a person's actions without contextualized information about a person's character, life narratives, and particular socio-historical circumstances involving interactions with specific institutions. I cannot accurately evaluate someone's action without knowing who she is and what situation she is in. Ethical obligations arise when ethical obligations address what a person should do to develop herself virtuously and achieve happiness given her particularities. By contrast, moral usually has a more focused scope on principles, values, or individual actions, often apart from individual particularities, sometimes without reference to human experience at all. I almost always speak of the moral in terms of the ethical. Chapter 2 lays out the basic components of the concepts noted here, but it does not defend them, as each would require a book-length treatment. Chapter 3 lays the last piece of the foundation by addressing the topic of play and the many ways people discuss it. But instead of addressing the works of other philosophers, Chapter 3 builds on the life and social sciences. This chapter makes the point that play helps individual organisms to develop psychological skills to cope with stress and learn about the world. In social animals, it also helps organisms to bond with each other and communicate optimal ways of performing different actions. Yet, while these points apply to humans, humans are more complicated, so we must contextualize the research about non-humans. This is because humans use values in play. It happens in the games of children who imitate social roles, and it happens in the playful actions of adults in spaces like cafes and taverns, where people can come together during leisure time to exchange ideas and culture. Humans, especially, use reason and complex sociality to play, and there is no non-human analog. Human play shares some characteristics with non-humans, but it seems inextricable from ethical and political values. Chapter 3 thus surveys some empirical work to talk about play's many dimensions. Chapter 4 is the most important chapter of the work, as it sets out my theory of playfulness. The critical and curious alike will want to focus there. In neo-Aristotelian fashion, I tie the virtue of playfulness to a sphere of life, leisure. By leisure, I almost always mean leisure time, the time that we have that serves no direct somatic, economic, or otherwise necessary goal, the time that we have to be free and choose what we do for its own sake. And I argue that playfulness helps us to use our leisure time to rest, develop ourselves, and engage our communities. I also argue that playful people must be serious, creative, humble, optimistic, and social. They should also avoid being flaky, severe, rigid, unruly, fragile, reckless, or unjust. This theory hopefully shows the ways that playful people use their leisure time to improve themselves and pursue happiness. Playfulness involves the various facets of an Aristotelian virtue: right thoughts, emotions and motivations, and right actions, manners of execution, and aspects of social awareness. Some critics might be concerned that my theory of playfulness makes too much of playfulness or renders certain things playful that should not be. I think a playful person, for example, can express playfulness when resting, being idle, playing a game, or relating with others. Whatever they use their leisure time for, playful people are playful when they use it well. Critics might take my theory of playfulness as too broad. However, I hope that my theory identifies the sphere of life that playfulness interacts with and gives a way of distinguishing between good and bad uses of leisure time. I hope that it explains the jumbled data on play by contextualizing playful actions in the life of a playful person. Other critics will worry that my characterization of playfulness ignores malicious things in play. But here again, I appeal to Aristotle. Playfulness, by definition, is ethical. But there are unethical aspects of improper playfulness, which I try to explain. The ultimate conclusion of this chapter is playfulness is a necessary condition for flourishing. Happy people are playful people. And the ultimate conclusion of the book is that happy people play and playful people live. We become most who we are in our leisure time, and playfulness ensures who we are is excellent. Playfulness as serious business. Play and playfulness involve much more than games or sports. Ancient Athens proves this too. Politicians used festivals, spectacles, and athletic contests to win favor from citizens and non-citizens, and they used luxurious prizes paid to competitors as ways of publicizing their wealth. Olympian victors in the most popular events won $700,000 for first prize, and Panathenaic winners received $130,000 worth of olive oil. This extravagance was not despised by the lower classes either. They identified with the diligence and endurance of the athletes, reminding laborers of their crafts or citizens of their times rowing warships. Sometimes these athletes used their fortunes and reputations to enter politics, and sometimes they were executed or ostracized for opposing tyrants, as with Callias, son of Didymaeus. What gets lost in many histories, though, is that many of the athletic festivals, for example the Panathenaic ones, included religious processions, public performances of theater and music, and closing ceremonies that used animal sacrifices for large feasts. In the rituals of play, the ethical and political mixed. The soul was never neglected for the body. In fact, Plato's most prestigious schools, Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, were gymnasiums built for training athletes and citizens long before they housed the lectures of philosophers. This plethora of activities hints at one important thing. Leisure time impacts life profoundly, and there are many ways of using it. I hope that this book makes us protect our leisure time and use it well. Playfulness, for me, is the way of sorting the good from the bad in such a diverse sphere of life as leisure. Why then do we not talk about play more often? And more pertinently, why do we not care about leisure and playfulness? Who plays, how they play, and what makes some types of play ethical or just? I will not offer any psychological explanation for the neglect of these questions in philosophy, but I will offer an experimental treatment in this book. To see the contemporary relevance of my questions and the ways the Athenians are similar to us, one need only consider millionaire athletes and their philanthropy, like LeBron James and his I Promise School, which gives its students free bicycles, meals, and college tuition after they graduate, or consider National Basketball Association athletes who protested China's treatment of Hong Kong in 2019, or ex-National Football League quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who started the trend of kneeling during the American national anthem to protest police brutality against Black people in America, beginning in 2016 and continuing today. Or we can consider the high incidences of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, among National Football League players, or their violence offense records. Or we can examine athletes turned politicians like Dwight Eisenhower and Arnold Schwarzenegger. These examples show how play affects our abilities to live well and to reflect on what our communities value. It affects who we are and how who we are has political implications. Or, as Ursula K. Le Guin once wrote, how you play is what you win. Play affects our lives, and it does not seem to be ethically or politically neutral. So we need a way of assessing it. I hope to offer one method by arguing that play affects our characters and that a good life requires playfulness.